Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to this online conference event that is organized by the Deputy Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic, Štefan Holý, on the topic of new technologies in urban planning. I'd like to take a moment and introduce and welcome the State Secretary of the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Martin Hybky.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you very much. And as well, it's my great honor that I may now introduce to you the main speaker of today's session, an architect, academic, author, and TV presenter who is regarded as one of the world's thought leaders in sustainable design, Professor Jasona Pomeroya, who is joining us today from Singapore. Hello, Jason, and thank you very much for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Thank you very much, and as well I would like to extend my warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today, so thank you very much for participating. Couple of organizational information from my side. We will be very much delighted to have all your questions, thoughts, comments, observations right after the session and the main speech that will be delivered by Jasona Pomeroya, so therefore we reserved enough time for the session. Without consuming any more time, I would like to kick it off, and I am absolutely sure that you'll find this conference insightful, inspirational, and worth investing your time. That's why right now I'm handing over to Martin.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I'm honored that we can all invite you into this very nice introduction of the urban and spatial planning future look into what could be done and what could be achieved with the new technologies and new thoughts in the world. As you all well may know, the construction law in Slovakia is heading towards his 50th anniversary. And as with the analogy with the car, you can all imagine that the car is not running properly. So the construction law in Slovakia doesn't really achieve what we want to have in a 21st century. The construction law consists of two parts. One is a construction as such, which is being a project which has a definite start and definite end and fairly rigid process in itself, while the urban planning is a completely different story. The urban planning in the past has been more thought as a picture or a photograph of a space, and we will share the information with the public and say this is the place where we will construct the housing, this is the space where we will do the factories and so on. This is, of course, not the way how Slovakia and other countries should look at the urban planning as such. The urban planning is a holistic view on the space in regards to a lot of elements Professor Jasona Pomeroya will talk about, and that's exactly what we want to achieve with this introduction and with this presentation, and that's the leap to the future. We want to show you how the future could look like and what are the elements we should look upon. So with this, I'm handing over the word to Professor Jasona. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, and Daniela. Thank you very much. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to be here today. My only reservation is that I can't be speaking to you in Slovakian. You'll have to put up with my English accent, I'm afraid. Now, in a good old British thumbs up, can we see the screen? So, okay. So I guess to begin with, allow me to give you a bit of an introduction as to who I am and what I'm doing. I'm the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio. We're designers and thought leaders of sustainable built environments. I've had the privilege of designing from the macro scale of cities in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, Asia, and Europe, all the way through to the micro scale of zero carbon homes. And ultimately, we come from a point of view where we believe that design isn't just about the whims of one individual holding the pen and having the conversation. It is a collaborative and complementary approach that brings different fields of expertise together. So Pomeroy Studio are involved with designing master plans of cities, landscapes, interiors, architecture, graphics and branding, and all underpinned by a rigorous approach to environmental design. And it is complemented by a Pomeroy Academy. Pomeroy Academy are the educators and researchers. We have the privilege of working with universities like Cambridge University, for which I visit and act as faculty, King Saud University, University of Yavale, James Cook University in Australia, where our research and courses help supplement those different academic courses and ultimately can be summarized in these 6 fields. Vertical urban theory, that looks at the role of sky courts and sky gardens as alternative social spaces. Prefab, precast and modular construction as a means of considering components and the kit of parts that are able to execute construction in a more productive and seamless way. The role of culture as the 4th pillar to sustainability in order to safeguard our own character and identity. Zero carbon developments in the wake of our fossil fuel consumption, how we can be thinking about cleaner, leaner, greener developments that can help preserve sites for future generations and reduce the carbon footprints of our developments. Greening the urban habitats, that looks at the quantifiable role of trees and plants in terms of the reduction in temperature, in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of water consumption. And finally, smart and sustainable cities and the role technology plays in enhancing the productivity of our cities. I guess I have a weird alter ego, and I guess that alter ego is as the TV presenter that basically brings the design and the research to a broader audience. I guess a few years ago, my students would say, why don't you actually bring your research to the masses? And I guess this provides us with an opportunity to spread a greener message. And I've had the fortune of working with people like the BBC, with National Geographic and Channel News Asia to bring the green agenda and the culture of cities to a broader audience. So you're probably wondering why I've got a photo of me when I was 3 years old in my back garden. My fashion sense has changed somewhat over the years. I used to like playing in my parents' back garden, and I used to make wigwam tents out of my parents' bed sheets and play cowboys and Indians. And that was my first introduction to architecture, I guess, the wigwam tent. Around the age of 3, I'm not going to give you my age, around the age of 3, this is what the Alaskan glaciers look like. So I just want you to think about this for 1 second. That was what the Alaskan glaciers looked like when I was 3 years old. By the time I went to Cambridge University to study, this is what the Alaskan glaciers looked like then. And that's basically a passing of approximately 24 years. And I think that the test of time, we can argue, provides us with a window on the cataclysmic events of climate change, rising sea levels, melting polar ice caps. But I think that we need to look at sustainability far broader. I don't think it's fair anymore for us to assume sustainability is about balancing social, economic, and environmental principles. Space, culture, and technology play equally important roles as we try and build better, greener, cleaner cities, neighborhoods, and districts. Since 2007, half the world's population has been living in urban areas, and this will increase to 75% by 2050. In terms of space, our current world population density is 51 people per kilometre, which is projected to be 66 people per kilometre by 2050. When you think about 2/3 of the surface area of the Earth being water, it means that we're putting increasing pressure on our city centres. In terms of the environment, the city only accounts for 2% of our global land area, and yet it accounts for a staggering 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And in the wake of globalization and the sense of transmigration as people move from place to place, culture is being challenged. Assimilated globalization and technological advancement challenging who we are, what we stand for. Even myself being half Malaysian, half English, I need to sometimes think about what my cultural integrity is. The economy. $3 trillion is the value of the digital economy today. The value has been generated in the past 20 years since the internet was launched. It's a phenomenal input, phenomenal impact that digitalization has brought to our global economies. And yet when we think about technology, if we want to continue enjoying life and not live in dysfunctional urban habitats, then cities have to embrace technology in a smart way, in a very sustainable way. And it needs to be good for the 7-year-old child as well as it is for the 70-year-old grandparent, people who may not necessarily be so in tune with technology. What this calls for is for both a design revolution, but also the embrace of an evolution in the way that we design our cities, our districts, our landscapes. If we think about the traditional city of spaces, I think that Rome is a classic example. Open space was characterized by the street and square. These were spaces for our social interaction. They provided the stage set for man and woman to be both actor and spectator in public. But with technological advancement, we see space almost taking a back seat to object. So by the time you get to the modern city, like Portland, it's not a city of spaces, it's a city of glass, steel, concrete, arteries that are allowing vehicles to maneuver. And arguably by the 21st century, we now have a network of cities that embrace the ability to work virtually. And also arguably Gemini worlds where we don't even have to be in a city. We can be working, living, playing from the comfort of our own home. Just as I see some of you may be at home now, I'm communicating with you in this virtual arena. The philosopher Hannah Arendt basically said that there are two types of person, animal laborans and Homo faber. What characterizes animal laborans is, I guess, the person who likes to get on with things, who likes to basically execute without necessarily thinking about the consequences of their actions. Whereas Homo faber would like to think, postulate, but never really commit to executing. The impact that has on the built environment is significant. On the left-hand side, animal laborans will just get on with it, build without thinking of the consequences, which can lead to disastrous effects. Then again, if you're to just dream and not commit beyond paper, those fantasies may constantly remain in a sketchbook. And I think it's time that we try and balance the two. There's no harm in dreaming, there's no harm in innovating, but we should test our ideas and execute. That means that we can be looking at lateral sources of inspiration. When I think about cancer research at the moment, some of the biggest breakthroughs are coming from the engineering industry, not the medical industry. And so when I was at Cambridge University, one of the greatest lectures I ever had was from a composer who was talking about the structure of the fugue. It's remarkable how lateral sources of inspiration can inspire, as well as lessons from the past, in order to provide a path for future design. I find it fascinating how Slovakia is such a center for the automotive industry. And arguably there are many lessons that can be learned from the kit of parts that you see in a car. How these different components can come together to be rolled off a production line with zero defect is something that I explored extensively in the creation of the first zero carbon house as a modular structure that could similarly pass the tests within a factory to be assembled within 12 weeks, rolled off a production line, and provide a setting for zero carbon development to be trialed and tested. But it also provided an opportunity for us to look to the past. A Kampong house as a classic example of a zero carbon house before the age of air conditioning and artificial lighting. The ability to embrace the cultural lessons of the Malay people and bring that through into a modern house for modern day Malaysians to live. And this effectively provided an ability to not only explore lateral sources of inspiration from the automotive industry, but also from the cultural heritage of Malaysia to create a zero carbon home that could be documented in a book that then became my first TV series. So with that particular introduction as to the balancing of design and research, I'd like to explore 6 ideas that could help us look to the future, to help shape better urban habitats, keeping in mind those 6 pillars of social, economic, environmental, spatial, cultural, and technological. Let's start with the social. I think we need to, first of all, embrace the great outdoors once again. On the left, you see an image of Beau Brummel, the flaneur, the person who would walk the streets, would like to be seen, would like to see. We are all in the habit in the 21st century of gaining our 15 minutes of fame. We love to be able to be out in public, but the pandemic world has seen us retreat into a virtual world. But in a post-pandemic setting, we need to try and strike a balance between the physical and the virtual. That will mean returning to the great outdoors. The Auckland Light Path in New Zealand is a great example of a mobility infrastructure that balances the ability to kind of step back outside and connect people via a walkway, a cycleway, an e-scooter way that can enhance people's mobility and social interaction and connection within the city. We are doing something very similar in Singapore in this 89-hectare sports, recreation and leisure precinct, which has the National Stadium at its heart. It is defined by this 5-kilometer loop, which effectively provides an ease of movement for the pedestrian, cyclist, the person on an e-scooter, to gain access to the various sports, recreation and leisure facilities that are contained within. But it also provides a glimpse to the past. In the 1930s, this was the site of the Kallang airport. And in the days of biplanes, those propellered aerial vehicles would land from different directions within this circular precinct. So the ability to incorporate this 5-kilometer route, this loop, this ramp, allows us to then hark back to the heritage of the place and tell a cultural story as well as a mobility story. Number 2, space. Let's use water as an alternative surface area for urbanization. These circles represent flood risk areas around the world. And of the 35 megacities that have over 10 million people, they are all within flood risk conditions. If any of you have not been to Miami yet, please make sure that you buy a pair of Wellington boots, because by 2050, your feet are going to get very wet. What we need to bear in mind is that the rising sea levels will pose a dynamic threat to places like the River Thames, the Singapore River, maybe even the Danube. And so what we need to think about more carefully is that in a rising sea level world, how can we adapt our waterways for new living, working and playing environments? I did a TV show called Futuropolis a few years ago, and I was exploring the future of waterways as one of the topics. And Eiberg in Amsterdam that you see here is a wonderful example of how you could have this dynamic setting where people can live, work and play on disused docks and ports, effectively releasing the value of those watery places that have not necessarily the high real estate values associated with inner city centres. This is something that we've also explored with the University of Venice. In a collaboration with them, we explored how a modular molecular structure, if you will, of floating farms, hospitality, civic institutional facilities, housing and workplaces could come together as an extension of the city. As people migrate back to Venice, there is a chance that we could be looking at more waterborne communities that can withstand the rising sea levels of the 21st century. This was similarly documented in a book, which then also became a pathway to the TV series Futuropolis. Number 3, environmental. Let's plan for a carbon negative future. Now, I know that we've all just come out of the COP26 summit in Glasgow, where many government officials were waxing lyrical about the need to push for more zero carbon communities and a zero carbon future. I don't think that goes far enough, I'm afraid. We need to be playing more of an active role especially as we are consuming on a daily basis the equivalent of 5 pyramids of Giza of fossil fuels. We are consuming 86 million barrels of oil just to satiate our daily needs. If we are needing this amount of fossil fuel just to be able to satisfy our daily lives, perhaps it's time that we think about cleaner, greener, leaner ways of zero carbon developments within our community. What you see here is a carbon negative house that we designed in Singapore back in 2012. The homeowner threw down the challenge. She basically said to me, Jason, I've seen your houses, they look great on TV, but I want you to build me one for the same cost as an average home in Singapore. And that set my heart racing. I thought, you've really set a real challenge. But we gave her a home that not only generated more energy that could then power an electric car, but we also did it at the same cost as an average home, and all constructed within a 12-week period. But we didn't stop there. We then wanted to see how this could be applied to communities like this one in Philippines. These $80,000 homes, 336 in total, that could generate its own energy and also effectively create a zero carbon living environment for the immediate community. Number 4, culture. Let's ensure the built environment is adaptable to social and cultural change. Now, I mentioned previously that I'm a bit of a mix, half Malaysian, half English, meaning that I'm mightily confused. And I guess London is a hotbed of similar migratory confusion. But that lends itself so much spice and delight and happiness. This French chapel that you see here was built by French immigrants from the 18th century. They were escaping persecution in France, and they found a place to live in East London, a place where they could set up their new method of cotton trading and linen trading. By the 19th century, this part of London became the home to Jewish immigrants who converted the chapel into a mosque. By the 20th century, then by the 20th century, the synagogue was converted by Bangladeshi immigrants into a mosque. What I find fascinating about this particular building is that it's a perfect representation of how cities can provide layers of history that can be culturally intense, interesting, and provide a means of celebration of our cultural diversity, inclusivity, and ultimately, in this day and age of equality, I think it has a very important role to play. We're doing something similar in Myanmar, in Yangon. This is the Secretariat building, a British colonial administrative headquarters. It was the seat of the British Empire's administration of British Burma. But today we're converting it into not only a museum, but a cultural arts complex that celebrates Burmese cultural identity. Once again, providing an opportunity to celebrate layers of history. Number 5, the economy. It's designed for a digital-based economy as we move from a technology-centric industrial revolution to a digital-centric industrial revolution. What does Cambridge University have in common with the headquarters of a major social media company? It's knowledge. Knowledge is the seat of power. Knowledge has been the seat of the digital economy. And what we are increasingly finding in our embrace of the workplace is that the designs of the vertical office campus is increasingly becoming one that is like a knowledge campus. The ability to incorporate education, sharing spaces and places that allow young entrepreneurs to rub shoulders with mentors and academics, and ultimately provide an ecosystem that would allow the knowledge to be grown and enhanced. Finally, the technology. Let's embrace mobility to enhance our lives. And as I mentioned earlier, I've had the privilege of doing various TV shows, and one of them was called Smart Cities, where I visited, as amongst others, Amsterdam, Shenzhen, Bandung, Barcelona, Higashi Matsushima, and Singapore. And we often find that technology plays a critical role in being able to help shape those cities. As we embrace digital worlds, we can see that a virtual platform, like what you see on the left with virtual Singapore, or what you see on the right with digital Britain, is that when you are creating what I call a Gemini world, a digital twin, you're able to test the city in a virtual setting to measure and monitor the performance in a safe environment before it becomes reality. And we've had the privilege of testing, honing, in order to create the physical world in Indonesia. This is a zero carbon office building in Jakarta, which is part and parcel of the BSD Digital Hub, a smart district coined by President Jokowi of Indonesia, the Silicon Valley of Indonesia. All of these notions stem from, I guess, a culture of innovation. The fact that we can look to the past in order to learn lessons, as well as use technology to experiment and innovate. And ultimately, it's this opportunity to combine culture and innovation that makes cities interesting. And ultimately, this was the subject of my most recent book. And hopefully it provides a glimpse as to our future. So what of the future? For me, I think that mobility and resilience play a critical role. Let's start with mobility. And if the 18th century city of spaces was all about the horse-drawn carriage, and the 19th century city of boulevards was characterized by the tram, the 20th century city of objects was characterized by the aeroplane. I would say that our 21st century is really about the hybrid vertical garden city that is smart, sustainable, and embracing new methods of urban mobility that go beyond the ground but stretch into the sky. From delivery drones for food and online shopping, to personal aerial vehicles to and from your own terrace, or aerial public transportation and the convenience of your public sky garden. These are not flights of fancy. The building that you see in the background is Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, which has a 1.2 hectare sky park, a public open space at height. We are currently designing the first passenger drone taxi terminal in Asia, in Singapore. When it comes to resilience, that resilience comes in the wake of climate change and rising sea levels, but it also comes in the wake of post-pandemic food sustenance and energy generation. How can we look to the water as that potential platform for resilient solutions? As I mentioned earlier, 35 of the mega cities of the world are in floodplain conditions. And maybe we can turn water from a perceived climate change related threat to a post-pandemic opportunity to reevaluate a surface area that could help take pressure off existing land-hungry energy and food systems, and hopefully promote greater island-wide food and energy self-sustenance. Our resilience to the negative effects of climate change has to be joined with the need for food security and self-sustenance. That's not just in Singapore, it's not just in the Middle East, it's a global issue, something that I hope we can explore further in Slovakia. Floating solar energy systems, agricultural food systems, and autonomous vehicles on water that can act as micro-shipping opportunities. Considering floating platforms that can be the base to generate mobile vertical farm racks that can generate root crops that can sustain the immediate community under the cover of lightweight tensile structures that would allow us to create a floating ring, like a baby's ring on the water, with solar disks that can generate up to 2 megawatt hours of energy. We're already in the research and development phase of this idea in Singapore, where we can generate 31,250 people's needs of food, effectively 500 tons of food per year that can offset the demand of 31,250 people. This can generate 2 megawatt hours of energy per day. It will consume 95% less water than conventional farming practices, and ultimately provide a leaner, greener method of food generation in the future. I hope some of those ideas will provide a prompt for our thinking about our future urban habitats. And arguably, it's about the ability to bring different voices to the table, not just the will of one individual, but civil society, state, corporation, and academia to work collectively to create more sustainable solutions for our urban habitats for a better tomorrow. So with that, I thank you very much. I'm delighted to pass back to Daniela and Martin.